In this section, we're going to talk about anticipatory vision. This actually comes from a couple of books written by Dr. Daniel Burris, and we've adapted them to flow. His one book is The Anticipatory Organization, and his other book is Flash Foresight. He's probably written tons of books beyond that, but those two are excellent. They're really good. And in a recent blog post, Dr. Burris even pointed out that Agile is not enough because Agile is reactive. And it was just like, wow, yeah, that was really good. And I'm going, yes, that is absolutely right. And Simon Sinek recently came out with a video blog as well. And he pointed out that vision is where you need to start. Okay, so even beyond starting with why, he was saying vision first. Ted and I, that is what we've been talking about for the last quarter of a century as we distilled and honed flow into the leadership framework that it is today. And so we're going to get into anticipatory vision. The leadership takeaways for this video on anticipatory vision are the Stacy diagram. And by the way, it can be a lot more complex than you think in using that. It's been very interesting to see some of the applications of that. Cynefin, it's spelled Cynefin, but Cynefin is the European version of the Stacy diagram done by Dave Snowden about 5-6 years after Dr. Stacy came up with his version. They both have their uses, and I like them both. And what's really useful with the Cynefin model is that you can actually map the overlap between Agilists and management consultants and the areas in which they work. For anticipatory vision, there's soft trends, which are based on assumptions. Those could be true or false, or they could change. Hard trends, on the other hand, are based on future facts, and you can start to predict those. And I actually had one of those aha moments and inspirational moments, and I give that in the 110-100 example a little bit further in here. And then it's for operational excellence and anticipatory vision, it's not an either or, it's a both and. If you are not led by vision, you will be driven by circumstance. We've been teaching this for 25 years, and it's really interesting that people will say, well, vision's so abstract. How do you use that concretely? Well, I can give you an example. A couple directors at a very large NGO in the US, the largest adoption agency in the US with 1,500 employees, two of the directors were very unhappy with each other, and they were having a very passionate discussion about a topic. And they had been through the training with Ted just a couple days before. And the one director, she looked at the other director and she said, okay, let's step back here a minute. Let's talk about vision. That was just utterly brilliant because each of them in the workshops had written down their visions. And I think one of the visions was connecting vulnerable children with families. And the other one was connecting resources to vulnerable children. Okay, and it could have been others, but whatever. They had a bunch of really good vision statements for this organization. Well, they took that, they looked at the vision, they looked at what they were both trying to achieve, they looked at each other and they said, it's all about the kids. It's all about the children. And in a flash, they were able to resolve a conflict that if you had used a conflict resolution tool like the book Getting to Yes, you would have gone through a long process of trying to, okay, what are their starting points? Where's the areas of agreement? And then we use that area of agreement as the starting point. Guess what? When you have clear visions in the leadership level, you eliminate the politics and the disagreement when people can go directly to their vision statements and say, well, here's my vision statement. The other person said, this is my vision statement. And they were in a nanosecond able to go, well, it's all about the kids. They came to the common point so fast that you just bypassed all the normal steps that you would go through in a getting TS process. So vision short circuits the need to have to go through long processes to resolve conflict. Vision is used to resolve conflicts. Vision is the North Star for the organization, for each of the leaders in the organization. And when they keep coming back to, well, what's the vision? What are we trying to achieve? You can quickly resolve disputes at the leadership level, and the same thing applies at the portfolio level, the program level, the project team level, the product level, individual level, right on down throughout the entire organization. If you have not mastered being able to use vision to resolve conflicts, you're going to be driven by circumstances, you're going to get politics, you're going to get confusion, friction, chaos. It's not going to be nice. So, if you are not led by vision, you will be driven by circumstance. Most of us that have been through Scrum training in the US or Agile training in the US, they'll immediately recognize this and you'll go, oh, okay, well, what's this got to do with vision? Well, in a few minutes, just bear with me, you'll see. What I wanted to point out here is that you've got unknown technology versus known technology, stable requirements versus unstable requirements, and then Dr. Stacy had put simple, complicated, complex, and chaos. And the Agilists will point out that, well, for complicated, complex, chaos, and anarchy, you would use Agile. And I've heard many Agilists say, well, you know, for simple, just use a checklist, use traditional project management, use whatever. And so it becomes, you know, when to use which methodology when you're trying to get a team or a project or a program to deliver something. Well, one of our FCPs made a brilliant observation, and that's the next slide. And basically, it's not as straightforward as you might think. And this is perhaps one of the best arguments I've ever seen for why you should use Agile everywhere, including the simple corner, okay? We ran into a project, Robert and I were working together on it, and the requirements were extremely simple. They were well known. The tech was simple and well known, but the communications had become extremely complex, and it was due to multiple internal and external partners and having to deal with them. And the goal was to choose an approach to help improve the comms and collaboration. Well, if you only did the 2 dots for the Stacy diagram, you would have said, hey, we'll just do classic traditional waterfall. And the team had really languished for about a year and weren't able to deliver. Finally, one of the IT leaders came to us and said, hey, can you help us out here? We think maybe Agile might be appropriate, even though on paper it looks like we should just be doing classic waterfall to get this done. And we looked at it and we said, okay, sure. As we peeled back the layers of the onion, Robert made the observation that, man, you know, this is really complex communication. And when I was training PMI, PMPs 10 to 12 years ago, we used to teach project management is 80% communications. Well, the reality is today it's probably 95% of everything that we would do in product development or project management is communications. If that's the case and you're running into communications that are complex, then in that case, you've just made the case for almost never, ever using classic waterfall again. The only time you would ever be able to advocate doing that is if the technology was simple and the requirements were simple and the communications were simple so that the green dot's down in the corner. My experience with even quote unquote simple projects in most organizations, especially large organizations, is that you've got such a level of complex bureaucracy, stage gate processes sitting over the top. They create such complexity that there's no such thing as simple communication anymore. So we could get into the communications calculator. I think we touched on that in our Scrum deck. It actually might be in this deck as well. But this is really important, and this makes the case for why you would basically almost never use classic again or waterfall. And what you would want to do is make a hybrid and put in as many elements of Agile as you possibly can down into that simple corner in order to alleviate the communication blockers that you're going to get, because we know at minimum your communications are going to be complex or complicated, and it could go anywhere from that to complex to even chaos and anarchy. The Cynefin, even though it's spelled Cynefin, it's a Scottish word. Dave Snowden came up with this one about 7-8 years after Stacy did his picture. I sort of like this one because it really helps people understand. You've got simple, you're sort of going counterclockwise here. You've got simple, complicated, complex, and chaos. Okay, and management consultants, their bread and butter is creating best practice or good practice, but primarily best practice. When you listen to management consultants and even executives and leaders, everybody wants best practice. They want it to be simple. They want it to be simplified. And the reality is that for each of these, as you look at them, good practice for complicated, emergent practice for complex, and novel practice for chaos, all of a sudden it makes total sense that for these 3 boxes for complicated, complex, and chaos, that you're going to basically want to use Agile and Agile methodologies. And he has disorder there in the middle. I've never heard a good explanation yet why disorder's there. I'm sure that there's probably one, and in his mind, I'm sure there's a distinction between chaos and disorder. By the way, a little humor here. If you think about it, consultants were the very first profession of any. Because if you follow the Judeo-Christian work ethic or the Judeo-Christian traditions, and you look at the creation story, it talks about the spirit of the living God hovering over the waters and that there was chaos. Well, the joke is basically, yeah, and who created the chaos? Well, that's us, the management consultants. So we're the first profession, actually. The one thing I really like about this diagram is you'll notice a little gray band there between chaos and simple. And I really like this because it's sort of like a cliff. And to me, what's amazing in many organizations is that organizations can quickly fall off the cliff from simple straight into chaos. And so this is a really good picture showing that. Now, applying what we did 2 slides ago to what we just to what we did to the Stacy diagram, Again, if the requirements and technology are known, simple. But if the communications are complex, you're going to use Agile. And again, the goal here is to move counterclockwise and take things from the complex and bring it down to the simple. And so it works the same way pretty much on the Cynefin picture as it does on the Stacy diagram. But there's one more thing I like about this picture, and I sort of alluded to it in one of the previous slides about the management consultants live down here in the simple corner, or even the good practice corner. And since we're management consultants, we also help create chaos. I have another picture that shows sort of where these two groups live. And so this is probably one of the key differences between people who are Agile purists and people who are management consultants. Agile purists will view all management as evil. And yet they use pictures that come from management consulting in order to try to explain what they do. But what I realized looking at this picture, and it actually works, I guess we could turn it and do it the same way on the Stacy diagram, but it worked especially well here, is because the Agilists primarily work with chaos, complexity, and complicated things and use Agile to distill it down to either emerging practice or good practice or whatever. The management consultants, on the other hand, their bread and butter, like I said earlier, is best practice. They own that corner, and that corner lives in the C-suite. The other three boxes, the executives delegate that out. And they say, okay, you guys come up with the solution. Okay. And so for the Agile purists, this is an either-or situation. For me, I look at this and I go, no, it's a both-and situation. To really deliver the value that a customer and client needs, you need to know when to wear your Agile hat, and you need to know when to wear your management consulting hat. I know that this was a little bit of a segue away from vision momentarily, but I wanted to especially go through the Stacy diagram because that's going to bring us back into how we look at anticipatory vision. So basically what I did is take the ideas from Flash Foresight and the ideas from the anticipatory organization and created a Stacy-like diagram for anticipatory vision. And so on the left we have high clarity of vision, low clarity of vision, low ability to execute strategy versus high ability to execute strategy. And as organizations are being disrupted, as they are watching what competitors are doing, and then they're saying, oh, we need to be agile so that we can react to what the changes that just happened in the marketplace are. And so if we react to those changes, that means that we're living down in the reactive corner, which means we're being driven by circumstance. And reactive and proactive have been around in business literature since the 80s. This isn't really a new concept in that sense. The two ideas that Dr. Burris introduced are, in his book Flash Foresight, the ability to be preactive, being able to perceive what may be going to happen. So it takes proactive and takes it to the next level that Dr. Burris described as preactive. If you're starting to live in a preactive state as a company, you're already going to be light years ahead of your competition, because now you're no longer going to just react or be proactive. You're actually going to be the pace setter and the leader, and you're not going to be the trailer or somebody who's just led by what's happening in the marketplace. Anticipatory is being able to take the hard and soft trends and go one step beyond just being preactive and being able to predict what is going to happen in the future. And so that's basically what we're going through on this slide. Is we've combined the concepts of flash foresight with reactive, proactive, preactive, with the concept of being anticipatory, being able to predict off the hard trends and soft trends. Now, our view is that without flow, that is having a well-defined, agreed-to vision and having high clarity of that, plus the ability to execute the strategies on which, from which you've distilled those from your vision, you're not going to be able to deliver an anticipatory organization. I've probably shared the picture before, but I think I'm actually going to draw a picture now and just drop it in this slide deck as part of what anticipatory vision actually looks like and how it works. As I shared in the transformation video that I've done earlier, I have a really good example of anticipatory vision where the soft trends, the hard trends, your gut instinct, your ability to see beyond the horizon, not just to be reactive, proactive, or preactive, but truly step into that zone of anticipatory vision. I was working with the guys from Nokia many, many years ago, and some of the executives, we were working on a different project together that wasn't directly tied to Nokia, but they were interested about my thoughts about, hey, what's all this with the Apple iPhone? What is it that really is going to, why should we consider this a threat? Well, what do you think, Andrew? What's really going on with the iPhone? And I looked at them and I said, well, in a brilliant flash of anticipatory vision, I walked up to the whiteboard and I drew these three lines with a 1, a 10, and a 100. And I said, well, guys, I said, it's going to go like this. And they looked at me and they said, well, what's this mean? I said, well, this first iPhone will probably sell 1 million units. And they're shaking the cobwebs out of the system. The second version of the iPhone will probably sell some 10 million units. When they get to the third version of the iPhone, they're going to sell 100 million units, minimum. And I remember one of the leaders leaning forward to me and just laughing, oh, Andrew, that's never going to happen. We produce 462 million handsets a year. We have a brand that is right up there with Coca-Cola and Nike, and we have worldwide recognition for what we're doing. Besides the 462 million handsets, that we produce every year. We own the markets in Africa, the Middle East, Asia, Europe, the Pacific. We really don't care what the guys in California are doing. And Andrew, come on. They don't even have an alarm clock in their phone. Now, in retrospect, what they had missed was that Apple was implementing a strategy where they were going to create an app store where Apple wasn't going to invest in hiring hundreds or thousands of programmers to develop apps for them as employees. Apple's strategy and vision was brilliant. They instead said, hey, let's create an ecosystem where you've got millions of programmers writing code for applications in the hopes that they'll be able to sell those applications in the App Store and become millionaires themselves in the process as they sell 1 million alarm clocks to people who want to have an alarm clock. Well, a couple years later, Marco, the marketing guy, sends me an email. And he goes, and it was just a short email, Andrew, do you remember what you drew on the whiteboard 2 years ago? You were right. Send a note back to Marco. Marco, what does it matter? Nobody listened. Not even me. And, it's like nobody listened. So Marco sends another note back. He says, well, can I forward this to Yorma? I said, well, feel free. Never heard from them again. But this, and I wish I had taken my own advice. I should have been, when I drew this curve, I should have just bought all the Apple stock I could have laid my hands on. And I would be recording this from probably the Bahamas or the Caribbean, not from the Arctic Circle. And so it would have been wise for me to follow my own advice, but at that time I didn't really like Apple. I was still pretty much pro Nokia. So, and I told those guys, I said, look, you make the big bucks. Obviously, you know something I don't know. But what's really interesting about this is that in the back of their minds, this echoed in the back of their minds. So that 2 years later, when Apple sold 1 million iPhones in the first week, they went, oh, he was right. Well, it doesn't help to be right if nobody listens and nobody acts. What's really sad, I mean really, really sad, beyond belief, is Nokia had an ready to go, ready for production prototype of a touchscreen telephone with a glass screen. And it was roughly the size of an iPhone 5, a little bit wider, a little bit thicker, but it was ready to go. Years ahead of Apple. But these same executives that laughed at me and said, oh, well, this will never happen. Those same executives made the decision that, no, this is too risky. We're not going to do it. So they killed the project. And this is the same guys who took Apple from being, or not Apple, they took Nokia from being a manufacturer of rubber tires for cars and rubber boots for people working out in the fields to switching to electronics, making cell phones. Which brings us back to here's what's happening. And it needs to be a constant balance. You have to be able to do creative destruction. We talk about that. in the transformation deck quite extensively. We won't talk about it as much here. In combination with operational excellence, Nokia had operational excellence. Good grief. They could make 462 million handsets a year. Okay, that's operational excellence. But they had put themselves in a position of being reactive. Even though they had in their hands the literal seeds for the creative destruction that would have kept Nokia in the position of being the world leader for cell phones. Instead, Nokia cell phone division ended up in the dustbin of history. And that's because they failed in being preactive, and even worse, in being anticipatory. Your leadership recap and application for this video is that we went through the Stacy diagram, and we showed you how it can be even more complex than you think, where you could have requirements and technology that are both known. But if you have extremely complex communications, suddenly we've added a third dimension to the graph. And now all of a sudden you're back out into complex or even potentially chaos. We showed you with the Cynefin the overlap between Agilists and management consultants, and we showed you that it's a both and not an either or. And then along with that, we went through anticipatory vision, how to look at and use soft trends, hard trends. I gave you the 1-10-100 example, and then the operational excellence and anticipatory vision. One of the things that's really important in all of these frameworks and models is the idea of pattern matching. And pattern matching is when you're looking at soft trends and hard trends, and you start to see these patterns emerge over time. So an application that you could take and do right now is in which part or quadrant, if you're using Stacy or Cynefin, is your team currently living? Are they living in a simple state? Are they living in a complicated state, or a complex or a chaotic state? And what steps do you need to take to simplify? Okay. Then, is your organization reactive, proactive, preactive, or anticipatory? That's something for you to think about. Write down why you think that is. And from just that one alone, that can help you start to look at different trends, both soft and hard, to see what the potential future may or may not be for your organization.